Howdy! Tonight I'm going to be talking about Mistborn by Sanderson, the first novel in a trilogy of trilogies which evolved into a quadrilogy. He was inspired by Harry Potter of all things, but I promise you he does something way more interesting with the concept. Instead of depicting a world where the Dark Lord is defeated and is kind of off in the shadows, what would happen if the purported, chosen one did not accomplish their ultimate objective and the world fell into ruin? This is the setting for this first novel in the trilogy, and it already kind of has parallels to the Stormlight Archive in that its setting kind of captures its theme. The stars and sun are blacked out by constant ash falls. At night, heavy mists roll in and frighten the sky, subjugated by the Lord Ruler, an all-powerful allomancer. Beneath the Lord Ruler, you have the Canton of Inquisition. They keep the world in a constant state of terror, establishing a hierarchy between the slave class and the aristocracy, who also subjugate the sky in their own way. The story follows our protagonist Vin, a girl who has lived on the streets her whole life. She works con jobs with a troupe of thieves moving from place to place before they're caught. She falls under the wing of a very intriguing group of characters who have an ambitious heist to pull off, one directly tied to the Lord Ruler himself. Mistborn was a really satisfying read. I can't deny that I have another Sanderson book under my belt that I did thoroughly enjoy, which was very easy to read and kept me engaged pretty much throughout the entire tale. Comparing it to the Stormlight Archive novels that I have already read, I would say Mistborn is a little tighter and more focused overall. Instead of 4 protagonists, there are really only about 2. There are also no interludes in this novel, so that really cuts its length down a lot. And overall, I would say the story it's telling is not quite as all-encompassing as Words of Radiance or The Way of Kings. And so it does have brevity going for it. But I would say that this is probably the weakest of the 3 Sanderson novels I've read so far, though it was really good, and I would totally recommend it to you if you're already on the Sanderson train. Integral to the story of Mistborn is the power system that Sanderson has devised for this world, known as allomancy. This power system draws from metals. People have to ingest certain kinds of metals in order to gain these fantastical abilities. It's a power system where Sanderson's philosophy motivating his laws of magic seems very apparent. There is an innate drawback to using these powers. You have to have vials of metal swishing around and you have to down them, and if you down the wrong kind, there are consequences for that. Very similar in how balancing works to how the Nen system in Hunter x Hunter works. I also want to apologize for how reflexively I bring up Hunter. I promise you it is not the only piece of media I've ever consumed, but it is simply the standard to which I hold all power systems to. While Nen is still, to me, the deeper and more compelling power system, allomancy is very interesting. It naturally allows for different classes of characters to come about, and how their abilities shape this world is pretty well explored. Currency, just like in the Stormlight Archive, is integrated into the power system. Characters have to flip a coin if they have a certain kind of ability that allows them to push off of the coin and kind of fly. It implies there's this innate risk and uncertainty, that using these powers are a gamble. That is never really explicitly said, but I do find it to be a pretty cool metaphor. Another way that Sanderson weaves a beautiful synergy between his world and his themes are that none of the Ska can see the stars, but when the main character uses tin and becomes a tin eye, which kind of enhances your senses, sort of similar to Gyo, she is able to see the stars. It's a really good metaphor for hope. Now that she has autonomy, now that she has the ability to do things in this world, she sees promise on the horizon that no one else literally can. The Lord Ruler, the main antagonist of the novel, the great subjugator, not much is known about this figure other than his vast wealth and power. When you first encounter him, he employs a form of allomancy called soothing, which creates this huge cloud of depressive aura, this actual emotional influence. Another interesting way that Sanderson kind of ties his mechanics into what he's trying to say. That being that a system of subjugation and exploitation creates a profound psychological deterrent for the subjugated class to actually rise up and effect change. This theme, though, I feel is hammered home a little bit bluntly, voiced through the protagonist Vin, who comes from a pretty harsh background. She has a really pessimistic, untrusting outlook on life. While I feel that is totally warranted given the context Sanderson feeds us, I do think that it's laid on a bit thick, and sometimes Sanderson's directness when trying to communicate the trauma and the sort of mental walls that she has, I feel like it's just a little too literal. I wish that he had delved into something a little less straightforward, if that makes sense. But it still is effective. What does kind of grow a little tiring reading the novel is the constant explanations of the power system. There is a bit too much hand-holding in this one, at least. And sometimes it does come at the expense of the flow of dialogue. In particular, there is a scene where Vin is getting tutored by a character named Marsh, and their interaction really did feel like something of a video game instruction manual or like NPC dialogue. It just felt very like, to the point, here are the mechanics of the world. There's almost no flair to how I'm saying this. It feels kind of clunky. Yeah, here you go. That is not to say that the whole book is written in this sort of tone-deaf manner. It has a lot of charm. There's his trademark wit, injecting a lot of levity into a story of violent uprising. Even more apparent to me in reading this novel is how Sanderson structures his books just on the whole. We can see the machinations of the overall story and where things will probably lead in the big picture, but it is those little details, how things do arrive at that final point, that make Mistborn worthwhile moment to moment. Sanderson punctuates the end of each individual part of his novels. Pretty obviously, they end in a climax or a twist of some kind. One in particular relates to how the overall heist goes very wrong, and it almost seems as if there's no chance that it could be pulled off after this event happens. I found that that was a really unexpected turn of events, and yet one that Sanderson totally telegraphs. The very end of this story, the reveal about who the Lord Ruler is, something that works as a great element of mystery, is really satisfying, and it tracks with everything that Sanderson has established thus far. Worth noting is how Sanderson's little blurbs at the start of each chapter really contribute to the mystery. The conclusion I'm ultimately coming to is that this book does deliver on what you expect it to deliver. The central group of thieves are all really well-rounded and complement each other in different ways, all of them having some sort of surprising element that gives them a little bit more dimension. The character of Kelsier in particular is given a lot of depth and a very tragic and interesting backstory that fuels his motivations. The protagonist of Vin, I do like her overall, and I think I end up liking Vin a lot more than I like, say, Shallan from The Way of Kings. Sanderson does do a lot of legwork to justify why our protagonist, who is not very experienced in this scale of a heist, is able to be as effective as she is. There's a direct tie to how the harsh life of the streets has actually made her perfectly suitable for the role that she needs to play, but it also does seem to be a backstory that seems designed to make us more sympathetic to her. The more compelling contrast I found in Vin was not so much how she had to fit in with this group of allomancers, it was more how she struggled to fit in with the upper crust. She's tasked with attending balls and engaging in socialite gossip to uncover information about the rivaling houses amidst the aristocracy. Part of their plan is to kind of pit them against one another, and so she has this tension where she starts to fall for this one guy, Elend Venture. I kept thinking of the Venture Bros every time I read him going off to keep Venture. It's sort of a Cinderella story, but one where Vin kind of rejects the more pompous airs of the upper class not really seeing the point in all of the formalities. Sanderson tries to temper hatred of the upper class and maybe give a more nuanced take, deserving of empathy in their own regard. All of the works I've read so far, and some of the others that I'm going through right now, like Elantris, emphasize the importance of books. It's a small touch, and one that, you shouldn't be surprised to see. The Lord Ruler's Ancient Tome, how Elend is such a bookworm. In Stormlight Archive, the book The Way of Kings, within the novel The Way of Kings, as well as the library in Elantris. I think it's cool how Sanderson injects an appreciation for books and literature as a cultural and historical document. Vin's infiltration of the aristocracy makes for some of the more interesting mysteries. For instance, there is a type of Allomancer which can kind of wield every preset ability, like how Karapika's eyes in Hunter give him the ability to wield Nen at 100%. He's so fucking cool. There's a bit of a game at play where people don't know who these Mistborn are. So the wealthy in this world have a few key players, and their identities are kept a secret. Sanderson does deliver on this in a way that was really compelling. It reminds me a little bit of, in Attack on Titan, how the identity of the Warhammer Titan is super important and is kept a mystery up until the very moment you meet it. Sanderson, being a writer who is compelled to explore a concept towards its natural conclusion, has also devised counter-Allomancer groups like the Inquisitors, which have these stakes nailed through their eyes and can wield allomantic powers far greater than the average Allomancer. Encounters with members of this character class make up some of the most exciting and intense sequences, as well as the Haze Killers. Haze Killers can't wear metal, so they've devised tools like glass knives and staffs. There is a note of brutality more pronounced here than in Stormlight Archive. Though Stormlight, of course, being a tale of war, does have death and carnage in abundance, I feel as if the descriptive element in this book highlights the grisly nature of violence in this world a lot more. Characters coming upon the work of an Inquisitor after they've interrogated someone. The way that Ska are beheaded, their blood is kind of like fed into this pool. Stuff that I did not expect Sanderson to delve into. Another thing that quite surprised me was the treatment of women in this world. There's an element in this that reminds me a bit of The Rite of the First Night from A Song of Ice and Fire, which is explored in greater detail in the prequel novel Fire and Blood, where plantation owners in this world kind of have their way with would-be brides. Just because they can. And I don't think Sanderson lingers in these moments long enough for them to feel exploitative. It feels naturally like the way things would be in an oppressive world like this. It also is a bit of character detail that Vin has to dress as a boy at the start of the novel in order to avoid sexual assault. Another theme that Mistborn is concerned with relates to how religions kind of evolve from folk tales, evolve from the actions of mortal men, and designs interesting religions, all built around different philosophies and fictional cultures. Best encapsulated in the character of Sazed. The role of his people is to keep an account of the world and the histories of all of these religions and cultures that have passed. The ultimate thesis that a character like Sazed represents is that religion, while a force capable of wreaking great harm and evil in the world, also contains a lot of cultural value, should be preserved, and lessons can still be derived from these figures. But also characters such as Yasna in The Way of Kings emphasize a scrutiny for modern religions as they exist in a contemporary setting. Ultimately, I find Sanderson's position on this was pretty agreeable, if maybe a bit surface level. So you should definitely read Mistborn if you're a fan of Sanderson's work. It is really satisfying and is not quite as daunting a first read as his Stormlight series. Though his writing does work best for me on an ambitious scale, this is still an ambitious novel, one that I'm curious to uncover how exactly it fits into the broader Cosmere universe. I'm also coming to the realization that, aside from probably a couple books, this is also a good place to start your trek into his works. If you don't want to take on The Way of Kings right away, you could probably finish this in half the time and leave satisfied and excited to check out the rest of the series, which I will do with time. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.